I'm not saying like, you know, X people out of your life and ice them
right.
out. I'm just saying, you know, you've got a gate that you can open and close and lock.
Isn't that beautiful? Consistent neglect of our own boundaries will lead to resentment and withdrawal. And so it's not serving the relationship. By setting and maintaining healthy boundaries, you're actually protecting the relationship.
Hello, welcome to Tea with Dymphna. I'm Lauren.
I'm Elizabeth, and we are two licensed Catholic psychotherapists. And today we are talking about boundaries in relationships.
Yes, we are. Indeed, we are. Our focus primarily is that we're going to be talking about how boundaries in relationships in a Christian context, I think they can be really misunderstood. I think there's a lot of, it's an overused word. And a lot of people they think it means what it doesn't mean, and they don't know what it actually means. So I thought some clarity on the topic, and then some examples of how to set them, what they're for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Why that they're charitable, actually, that boundaries are charitable to you, and to the people around you. It's very normal to need to rehearse them with somebody and learn about them and have some insight from a therapist about like, how should I set this loving boundary with my mom who consistently does this thing that really bothers me? And what does that look like? And what am I responsible for? And then what am I at all responsible for her reaction and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. The two kind of like general issues that I see with boundaries is either I don't know how to set and maintain healthy boundaries, which leads to resentment or withdrawal on my part because it just gets too much. Or on the flip side, I'm in a relationship with someone who sets healthy boundaries and I'm not used to that. And then that person experiences that as rejection.
Yeah.
Of like, what do you mean you need time to yourself? What do you mean you don't want to tell me that personal thing? Do you not trust me? Rather than like the other person is able to set healthy boundaries to say, I love you, but I need some time to myself, or I love you, but this is really personal and I'm not ready to share. That can be a really healthy boundary. And if you're someone who didn't grow up with boundaries and then you're in a relationship with someone who actually sets very healthy boundaries, that can be really challenging to understand and accept and not take personally.
Yeah.
So I've seen both, kind of like on both ends, like learning how to set boundaries and learning how to respect other people's boundaries.
Yep. Another misconception that I've seen is that boundaries mean like somebody has to listen to you. Like, so I'll give you an example. Like I've heard people say like, I told this person that, like I told my significant other that they need to clean the dishes. And I'm like, that's not a boundary. Like, that's not what a boundary is. A boundary is not that people will listen to you when you tell them. A boundary is, hey, so I've noticed that I'm always doing the dishes and I am starting to grow resentful. It makes me feel angry and used and underappreciated. And so I'm just going to request that you do them on Tuesdays and Thursdays because I can do Mondays and Wednesdays, no problem. And on the weekends, we can do them together or whatever. And if you can't accomplish doing them on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm just letting you know, like, I'm not going to do them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And if that bothers you, they're going to stack up in the sink.
Yeah.
And then the inevitable response that I get to this script that I just gave you is like an alternative script to saying you need to do the dishes.
Yeah.
Is going to be, but I don't want there to be dishes in the sink on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And that's where I say like, you get to choose between having this boundary that says like, I would like for you to respect this decision that I've made, or like I'm going to decide that the amount of energy that I'm putting into this thing is unfair, unequal, and I don't like it. Or you need to decide, I care more about the dishes getting clean than I do about this boundary. Because you cannot force people to do something that they don't want to do.
That's right.
That's not what a boundary is.
Yeah. You can only control your own boundary, and you also cannot control how other people are going to respond to your boundary. And that's not your responsibility. If you set a healthy boundary and somebody else has a poor reaction, that doesn't mean your boundary was incorrect. Exactly. That just might mean that the other person has to learn to respect your boundaries.
Yes, I totally agree. I think that's a great point, that we cannot in any way control how someone responds to the limits that we set. An analogy that I like to use for people is I like to say that if you could imagine, I actually think I stole this from a book. So if you've read this somewhere, I think I probably stole it from the book Boundaries. But
I read that book. That's a really good book. Yeah,
it's a great book. The visual I believe that they give in that is of a front yard with like a garden, and that a boundary is like a gate that you put around the yard, and people are allowed in it if they're willing to respect the fact that you have a nice garden with beautiful flowers, and they're willing to walk on the path that's assigned to them. But if they're not willing to walk on that path and they are running amok and ruining your yard, it is time to kick them out. That is what the gate is for. That is what the fence exists for. And the gate like symbolizes the ability to open and close. Like, we're not saying build a wall. I'm not saying like, X people out of your life and ice them out. I'm just saying, you've got a gate that you can open and close and lock.
Isn't that beautiful? What I've observed is that sometimes a lack of boundary can kind of be covered up by a certain attempt to practice Christian charity. So for example, the idea of wanting to serve with humility, which is obviously a Christian value, and I'm not speaking against that by any means, right? But I think this can sometimes lead to actually neglecting our own boundaries to the point where it's actually not serving us or their relationship. Because again, consistent neglect of our own boundaries will lead to resentment and withdrawal. And so it's not serving the relationship. And I think the whole aspect of humility, which is such a beautiful virtue. I mean, humility is the antidote to pride, right? Which is, right, pride is at the root of all sin. So, growing in humility, I think, is just such an excellent way to grow in holiness. The thing with humilities, though, I feel like it sometimes gets misunderstood. A priest once said to me, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking about yourself less. So humility is not thinking less about yourself, but thinking about yourself less. So even there's this passage where Jesus says, when Jesus sends out the disciples, and he says, if a town doesn't receive you and doesn't listen to your word, shake off the dust from your feet and move on. And I think there's something to that of serving in a humble way and loving in a humble way does not mean letting people walk all over you. Does not mean letting people abuse you. And here's the thing, right? We think about Jesus and say, well, Jesus was humble and he was abused, but that was his decision. Like, he chose that from a place of like strength. Like, he's God, right? He could have put an end to the abuse, but he chose to do that, right? So that comes from a position of strength. So when we're serving in a humble way, like, we're always choosing that, right? That comes from a position of strength. And I often find when it comes to like severe like crossing of boundaries, or like we have like a lack of boundary, that's like we're not choosing to let the other person like in. It's just like we don't actually like have a healthy boundary. And so I'm just, do you ever find that, Lauren, that gets kind of confused with like, but I don't want to set a healthy boundary. I don't want to say no to someone asking for help because we should always love and always serve. And then there's this whole guilt, like, right, when we say no to someone, that, people feel guilty. Do you have anything to say to that?
I do. Yeah. One of the things that I like to flesh out for people who are Christians that I'm seeing, and really want sort of the evidence as to why setting boundaries would be like aligned with their Christian values. I like to point out that there are two different kinds of suffering that we note. This is biblical. Like, there's casting your pearls before swine, which causes suffering. And it's a unfruitful, uncharitable type of suffering. You see this with like alcoholics, addicts, people who are very narcissistic. Like, they're making themselves miserable, but the offset, like, you're not getting anything back for it. It's and then there's the suffering of like picking up your cross and carrying it. And I'll often ask people like, what's the difference between these two things? One of the titles that Christ is given in Scripture is the Beloved. Christ knew that he was loved and valuable Otherwise, if he wasn't valuable and he didn't know it, then it's no sacrifice that he died for us. Like, if he's not valuable, if I don't think of myself as valuable and worthwhile, first of all, why did Christ die for you? Second of all, what sacrifice is there in you giving anything away? Because you're not valuable, you're not of value, so why does it matter what you do? It's the same for Christ. Like, he knew that he was of value, and that's why it mattered that he offered his life for us. He knew that he was beloved. So that's with that same understanding, we approach our own lives. I'm of value to God, if to no one else, and God is the most desirable being in the universe. So you're desirable to the most desirable being in the universe. You are of value to him, of so much value that he was willing to come, be incarnate, and die for you. So just to have you with him. And so all that to say, like, it's with that understanding that we approach the idea of boundaries. Everyone else is also as valuable as this. Every single other person is just as valuable as you. But I'm responsible for me. I'm like primarily, like, unless you're a mother or a father, in general, the person that you are most responsible for is yourself. If you have very, very young children, this is an exception. But, you know, for today's topic, we're going to talk kind of like about individuals. And so who maybe aren't mothering really, really young children. But there are instances where someone else's needs take precedence over yours, you know. But, or if you're, you know, nursing a beloved person, like back, you know, I don't know, a grandparent or something in the house. So I think that can be a really important distinction for people, is understanding that there are different types of suffering, and not all of them are worth doing. It's not worth suffering if it's for something that's not fruitful.
That's so insightful. Thank you for connecting the dots there between the suffering and the boundaries. One thing that I like to tell people when they, you know, really struggle with setting boundaries because they feel guilty, is I like to tell them, you know, by setting and maintaining healthy boundaries, you're actually protecting the relationship. I kind of said this a bit earlier, but, you know, if you don't set and maintain healthy boundaries, essentially that will hurt the relationship, because there's only so much that you can take. So the resentment is not always overt, right? So it might come out as passive aggressiveness or withdrawal. Sometimes it'll come out in like so-called like explosions, right? You can only take so much, and then you explode and say, you never do this, you never listen, and I'm always overloaded, you know? But it can also just be very like passively, right? And like comments that you make, or just in like like I said, like withdrawing, not seeking closeness as much, which is all creating a rift between you and the other person. So setting healthy boundaries really is serving the relationship. So if you're wanting to work on setting healthier boundaries, remind yourself that this is doing a good service for the relationship. A healthy relationship needs healthy boundaries.
Yes, it does. One of the things that I like to do, I say this to myself, is I like to give people a little mantra. I say that healthy boundaries are charitable to God, myself, and other people. And I have people practice saying that in the morning, like, you know, no is a vitamin, I should take it. So healthy boundaries are charitable to God, myself, and other people, because they literally are. They're essential to maintaining healthy relationships, just like Elizabeth said. As well, they give you as you begin to set them, they imbue you with your own sense of self-respect, your ability to stand up for yourself and to recognize that you have the power to take the best care of you that you're able, that you're going to take on the responsibility that God has given you to, take good care of yourself. When you start doing that, people will often tell me, I've always, you know, my whole life I've been waiting for somebody to stand up for me or to take care of me. And now I'm realizing the person I was waiting for was me. That's a really heady feeling. It's a very, very good and positive feeling when you begin to respect, you respect yourself.
Yeah.
And that feels good. And then when you start to respect yourself, you know who you don't care about, like, is other people's opinions.
Yeah.
It makes you, interestingly enough, more humble.
Oh, yes. Right. Because you think less about yourself and what others think about you.
Yes.
That's so right. Yes. Yeah. Yes. That was such a good point you just made, Lauren, of how setting healthy boundaries is not the opposite of humility, but it actually leads to more humility. Yeah.
Because you believe that what you're doing, you're to the best of your ability, you're discerning what you think is right, and you're making that abundantly clear. And Christ does this all the time in the Gospels. I think it's a really interesting misconception that, like, being a Christian means being really nice. And I'm like, have you read the things that Jesus said in the Gospels?
Yeah.
Nice is not the word that I would use to describe that man.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
He
loving,
was
charitable.
Loving. He was, but he was also like, you're a pit of vipers.
Yes.
So,
yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Same guy.
Yeah.
Still whipped people out of the temple with cords. Okay.
Yes.
So, he was more of, I liked, Jesus was kind of like, he was like a cowboy. He does have that kind of like coming in from the outside, defending that same narrative that, like, a lot of cowboy stories where it's like defending the weak. If you want to defend the weak, that does not mean being a nice person. Right. Defending the weak is not, nice people aren't doing that.
Right.
So,
right. Yes. Niceness needs to end where your own boundary gets crossed.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, Lauren, do you have any tips for how to set healthy boundaries?
I do. I think scripting is really helpful for people. Getting your own therapist to talk about these things with, so that they can maybe give you some ideas and perspective on where should I set boundaries? What am I willing to sacrifice and not? Like I said, the dishes example, not everyone's willing to sacrifice getting clean dishes. So that's maybe not a time to set boundaries. Yeah. But so, having a healthy outside perspective. That being said, one of the best ways I think to set boundaries is to use I statements, and just to say, I have been feeling like misused, or I've been feeling neglected in this way. I am really concerned about X, Y, or Z. Therefore, I'm planning on doing X. If that's a problem for you, or if you'd like to see things, like, there's room for conversation within that. However, if you decide not to respect this thing, I may, and then there should be like a preconceived consequence. Now, I'm not saying like you can't tell someone like you're in timeout if they're an adult. That's not what I'm saying. Yeah. But the consequence is, ultimately, the reality of boundaries is, if you continue to disrespect me, you will get less of my time and energy, because that's what I'm in control of.
Yeah.
So that's a very general and broad, like, framework for how to set them. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the number one thing when we talk about setting healthy boundaries is first recognizing what are my boundaries, and also where is there like a lack of them, so I know where to set them. I like your I statements. I think it's important to give people, like, to think about, like, how can I present them to the other person? And then I think remembering that kind of everything we just said, that it's actually serving the relationship, and it's serving your own mental health.
Yeah.
Right? You'll be able to actually have more energy for relationships if your boundaries aren't constantly crossed. Sometimes it can be helpful to get the help from other people, like you mentioned, a therapist. I guess if we're thinking of in romantic relationships, that might be, you might get like a couples counselor to like relate between the two of you. But if it's like any other relationship, like say it's with like a coworker or your boss, you could get like another person, like another one of your coworkers, to like come and like be a witness to these are the boundaries I'm setting. These are the issues that I'm seeing, to just help you have someone to help you, and to also help you be accountable for that.
What would you say some of the key indicators, like internally, intrapersonally, that a person might encounter in an area where they like it's apparent to you that they need to work on boundaries? So like what kind of words when a person's like describing an aspect of their life indicate to you that like, oh, they're probably struggling with boundaries in that area of their life?
Oh, that's a good question. A lot of times when people lack boundaries, they're not aware of it, in my experience. Once people become aware of it, they will typically use those words to me. Like they will say like, this person is always crossing my boundaries. Most of the time though, in my experience, people are actually not aware that the issue is a lack of boundaries. And so then I work with them on identifying that and having them see, oh, I need to set my boundaries. And that's usually like a process of them like realizing that that's a good thing, that that's not them being selfish or mean.
Yeah.
Right. Certain dynamics that I see where usually there's boundary crossing is people who have the personality structure of being a people pleaser. Like when I get to know someone and I'm just noticing even like how they interact with me, that I feel like they're wanting to like please me in the way they like talk and like ask me how I'm doing, and nothing wrong with that at all. Like not, discrediting that, but there's like certain personality structures of people who are, which can also be a strength, right? If you're like someone who, can identify like, how can I do something to please the other person, to be kind, to be generous, like that's a good thing. But if it goes to the extreme where there's this fear of, I don't want to do something to upset the other person at the cost of my own boundaries, that's usually there's always some like lack of boundaries. Now, somebody who has the personality structure of a people pleaser can absolutely learn how to set and maintain healthy boundaries, and then can actually harness that as a strength and say like, I know my boundaries, and outside of those boundaries, like, so I have my boundaries set, so I am safe, so to speak. And now I can go and use this strength of having a lot of capacity to be kind to people, to serve, to be generous. I mean, those are all beautiful things, right? But it really needs strong, good, healthy boundaries. Another one, when I see in enmeshed family systems, when there's one or more family members who are enmeshed, usually there's no or very little boundaries there. I've even had people say to me, I feel like we're the same person, or I feel like what they are feeling, I am feeling that, which is a problem, right? Yeah. Because, you oftentimes it's with a parent and a child, and, then like a grown-up child and their parent, and that enmeshment, which makes it really hard for that adult child to make their own decisions. And oftentimes a lot of guilt with, I want to lead my own life, I want to make my own decisions, and then taking on a lot of responsibility for parents who might be stressed or overwhelmed, not knowing where the other person's emotions begin and where the other person's emotions end and where mine begin. So the enmeshed family system is where I see that a lot too. How about you?
I think some key indicators to me that someone's struggling with boundaries are a desire to control outcomes to the extent that they're willing to sacrifice their own needs. So that can look like resentment is a big one, which you've already touched on. Being overly controlling. That's a hard one to swallow, I think, when it's like, well, but no, I'm not being overly controlling because I let people walk all over me. And it's like, okay, but letting people walk all over you in order to have a certain outcome.
Can you give an example of that?
I can give one in classic, like, alcoholic family systems. Let's say there's a person who regularly is using drugs or alcohol, and their partner, spouse, knows that it's a problem, but they get drunk one evening and they wake up late for work, and or they get drunk like a series of evenings in a row, and they wake up late for work and they're running behind, and this person is like, making their coffee, they're covering their butt, like they're in order to protect them from potential consequences. And I might be having a conversation with this kind of person, you know, that's usually the person who's like coming in, right? So they come in and they're like, and I'm just so resentful, but I have to do this. So when I hear those kinds of distortions, like I have to, and I can't stop doing it. And it's like, okay, because you are set on having a specific outcome, and you can't be set on having an external outcome and having self-respect. One, you're going to have to, in life, this is just true of life, you're going to have to prioritize one or the other. You cannot have expectations about how things are going to turn out and need those things to turn out that way if it's in conflict with your own inner self-respect and need to take care of yourself. Like these things can be in conflict with one another, and you have to decide which of these I'm going to prioritize. So I would say in that kind of a situation, it's like, okay, but let's just recognize that the reason that you're unwilling to set a boundary with this person and say, I'm not going to help you get ready anymore because you have a problem, and you have to face the consequences of that problem so that you can get help and realize like this is not a functional way to live. They're like, well, no, I'm not willing to do that because what if they leave me? What if they lose their job? What if they, et cetera, like the list goes on. Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, then that's your decision. But and I respect your decision, but also.
Yeah. Relationships, I like to think of them as pendulums. The more you enable that kind of behavior of like, I'm making your coffee, I'm getting everything ready, I'm like covering you. The other person like swings in the other direction and doesn't have to actually like step up. The moment you create a void, typically, I mean, it totally depends on the person, right? But what I often see in the dynamics that the other person actually like fills that void.
Right.
Because yes, you don't want your partner to lose their job, but they probably also don't want to lose their job either. Right. And so there can be that element of like, no, like I can't trust that they will actually step up. Try it. You know, they might surprise you of like, wow, I actually sat down and didn't do anything. And the person saw that the dishes had to be done and just went and did them. Right. But if you're always kind of expecting that the other person isn't going to come through, and you always do the things that they should be doing, you never give them the chance to actually step up. So create that void, allow them to actually do what's in their responsibility. Yeah.
Great point.
Yeah.
Yeah. There has to be a void for somebody else to be able to step up. And if you're the kind of person who's like, I'm always capable and everything always falls on me. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Because you're consistently running in to help instead of recognizing there are other people with skill sets and capacities that could also step up, and it doesn't always have to be you. And in order for you to recognize that it doesn't always have to be you, you have to be willing to let things fall.
Yes.
You have to be willing to let things fall.
Yeah. You can't control what other people do within their boundaries, but you can control what you do in your boundaries. So you always have the choice to say, I am too tired to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm not going to do it. And the other person might choose to say, I don't want to do them either. And so then nobody does them, but you always have the choice to get up and do whatever it is that you think should be done, or you just leave it and see what happens. And then either you get to it later or the other person gets to it later, or it might just start the conversation that all of a sudden it's like, wait, something changed, right? Whenever you change the dynamic, when you like disrupt the system, so to speak, right? Things realign and there can be a change in the dynamic. So sometimes it can be good to just experiment with that and say like, what happens if I shuffle things? The cards might fall new, and at the very least it'll start a conversation. That can hopefully be fruitful.
This kind of reminds me of like, as we're talking about this concept of the difficulty of letting go, it reminds me that there are certain disorders that in particular struggle with setting boundaries, and it's essential for them to do so. Yeah. As we're talking, the words that are coming to my mind are like fear of abandonment. And so
yes,
that is a huge, that can be a huge piece of people pleasing,
Mm-hmm.
as well as just a really, really difficulty saying no.
Yes.
It's present in enmeshed families. It's present in alcoholic or addictive family systems. It's present in just dysfunction in general.
Or just even if you grew up in a family system where maybe growing up you experimented with setting boundaries and your caregivers had a poor reaction, you know, might have even said things like, if you do that again, I'm going to leave, or even maybe not even saying those words, but responding with a way where you felt rejected, where you and your boundaries were rejected instead of respected. You might grow up with this sense of setting boundaries is dangerous.
Yes.
Because I might lose the other person's love. The other person might leave me. Right?
Yeah. What would you say to somebody who, felt like, okay, well, if I set boundaries, then I'm going to lose their love?
Well, first of all, I would want to know more about the relationship and find out who's your partner. Like, what are they like? And then start to challenge that and ask more questions and ask, like, do you think that's, I mean, I know that that's what feels true, but is that actually true? Has your partner ever, when you had a fight or anything, made any motions to leave? And I mean, some people genuinely use that as weapons. Like,
sure.
Right? Like, I'm thinking of like someone who's narcissistic, would use that, right? To like threaten to leave. But in general, if you have a healthy partner, I would, explore like their relationship and look for clues, look for evidence. Is this actually true? Is this actually founded in truth? Like, has your partner ever given you the sense that they will leave you if you set up boundaries? Or is this more your own kind of wound, right? So like, we know, what are we working with? Are we working with like a relationship difficulty here? Or are we working with like your own kind of like the way you grew up? That's the first thing that I would clarify. And then, I would work on that wound, right? On that, maybe ask them like, what was that like growing up? Like, how did your parents respond when you set boundaries? What was that like? What came up for you? What did they do? What did they say? And to kind of like work on those and have them resolve those. And then, right, with that kind of insight of becoming more aware of what are actually my motivations to do certain things, with that insight comes the power to choose and say, is this behavior serving me? Is not setting boundaries serving myself or the relationship? And usually people come to the conclusion, oh, it's not serving me because it's making me resentful. It's making me unhappy. Like, it's maybe sometimes even the partner might get irritated with me because I'm always like, no, I don't want this. Okay, fine, right? That can really create like tension from both sides. And so gaining this kind of insight on those underlying motivations and fears can really help people to choose. And then I have them experiment and say, set a small boundary, right? Expose yourself to that fear and see what happens. And oftentimes they come back and say, yeah, they were fine. Like, they respected my boundary. Did they leave? No. Yeah. Okay, let's try setting another boundary and like having them like experiment and actually through that relationship experiencing that setting healthy boundaries is safe within a safe, healthy relationship.
Yeah, that's very, very good. The little exposures, as well as just recognizing that setting boundaries is safe within a safe and healthy relationship.
Yeah.
What about if you were to encounter somebody who was in a not, like, you knew it, like they're in a not healthy relationship, and setting a boundary really would send someone away? What would you say in that context?
Yeah, well, I think it would depend again on what kind of relationship it is. If it's, if someone is in a relationship with someone who's truly a narcissist, I would say boundaries are extremely essential if you want to emotionally survive that relationship, right? Setting boundaries, and you wouldn't like tell the person, I am setting a boundary, because that would probably make them very angry. You would just set the boundaries of like, I am setting a boundary of what kind of topics I talk to the person, right? Pick safe topics. Like, we talk about the weather. We talk about, what we're going to eat for dinner tomorrow, or a movie that we watched. Safe topics, and you protect your own heart. Yes. You don't give the other, you don't give the other person any like fuel. And setting boundaries that way, I think is very essential, but you wouldn't tell them. I think if you're with someone who would leave you based on setting boundaries, you would not announce your boundaries. You would just set them for yourself. Because really, the other person doesn't necessarily need to be informed of your boundaries. You just set them.
Yeah.
That would be what I would say. But I mean, I would ask the question, like, if you're in a relationship with someone who cannot accept boundaries, I think there's like a lot more issues there. And I think it would depend on like, why is that person not able to do it? Is it because they themselves maybe had difficulties, or they themselves have never experienced how healthy boundaries can be loving, and so they receive it as rejection? Well, that can be, maybe then like one or two like couple sessions might be really helpful to kind of like explain boundaries and let the other person share like why they struggle with that boundary, and maybe working on like, how can you set a boundary? Like, what words can you use to be like affirming? Because for somebody who feels rejected by boundaries, it's that like abandonment too. Maybe like they feel like abandoned if somebody sets a boundary. So to say like, whenever you set a boundary, can you also give like an affirming message? Like, I love you, but right now I'm going to go for a walk. I love you, but right now I don't want to talk about this, right? You give that affirming of like, basically saying like, I'm not leaving. I love you, right? I'm not rejecting you, but this is my boundary. And with time, right, that other person can actually learn that boundaries are okay, and that this doesn't mean that the other person's leaving them. So that's what I would say. Yeah. But if there's like a true like personality disorder involved, then you set the boundary, and I would say you probably don't share that with them. You just set them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that, Lauren?
I think a couple of things. If someone were to come to me and say, I'm afraid that setting boundaries will make people stop loving me, I have them then define for me what love means. Oftentimes people will use words like unconditional, and then I'll say, so if you setting a boundary or a rule in your life sends someone away like forever, and they reject you and they hate you for that, did they ever love you? If I'm unwilling to even like consider that you have needs and wants and you're a person too, I don't love you.
Yeah. Right. Unless you just struggle with like the boundary themselves, right? Like,
sure.
If you, right. I think I,
but ultimately, like, if they're unwilling even to revisit that conversation or engage, it's like, I'm just done with you when you make your own emotional needs known in this room. When you bring, you fill up 20% of the emotional space in a room and somebody rejects you for that.
Yeah.
Honestly, sometimes setting boundaries really does send people away. And that's when I'm working with somebody like that, when they're like, no, I did that, and it sent this person that I love away. And it's like, that's a very painful thing. That's something that like you may have to grieve. And also this facing of your like sort of ultimate terror, the thing that you're maybe most afraid of, that people will leave you if you also have needs and wants, is a blessing. It doesn't seem like it when you're going through it, but in time you really do come to see that like it's the best thing that you could have done for yourself and that could have ever happened to you. And that's one of the things that I like to teach people when they're like, and I'll say, setting boundaries really does get easier because you just start to do it in all aspects of your life. And then the people who gravitate towards you are people who have healthy boundaries themselves. This is why healthy people attract healthy people, actually. I love to be around people, and I mean this so sincerely. I really do love to be around people who are direct and assertive, because then I don't have to do any guessing. I do not want to read between your lines. I just don't. I don't want to. And so I really do appreciate that. Like, and so, as you set boundaries, you nip in the bud those relationships where people are like, I want to use, like, I call them users. Like, there are people who they just want to use, and they'll show up if they think that they can get something out of you. And if they recognize like, hey, yo, this girl does not take crap from anybody, you know what they're going to do? Scoot. They're not going to want to be there for a relationship with you. And honestly, good. You deserve to be with someone who will respect your boundaries, and also somebody who will help you maintain your boundaries. Right? Like somebody who like encourages that and doesn't walk away from you. So growing, and again, this is how having healthy boundaries helps you grow in humility, growing in your capacity to accept that people will not like you because you are a person too. But you know what? There are going to be people who dislike you even if you didn't have boundaries.
Yeah.
Because there are people who don't like people who don't have boundaries.
Yeah.
It's better to be liked for being authentically, or sorry, it's better to be disliked for being authentically yourself than it is to be disliked for not even having any self-respect.
Yeah.
If you're going to be disliked for one of these two things, like ask yourself, because you are going to be disliked by people. Would you rather be disliked because you're authentically self-loving, or would you rather be, and getting something out of that, fruit, or would you rather be disliked because you're a pushover and somebody encounters that and it just turns them off? Like,
yeah,
like at least you get something out of being self-respecting.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. It reminds me of this quote from Jane Eyre, which is a very great book. And there's a part in it where Jane is at school and she's quite young at this point in the story. And the like headmaster at the school is very cruel, and she's really experienced a lot of cruelty from almost all of the adults in her life. And she's an orphan, so she's sent to live with like a mean aunt and all this stuff. And the aunt sends her away, and they're really ostracizing her at this point in the book at the new school that she's at, and they're also ridiculing her. And they have her standing on this little stool in the center of the room, and her friends are mocking her, the classmates are mocking her. And she says internally something along the lines of like, if all the world hated you and thought you bad and like a terrible person, but your own conscience approved you, you would not be without friends. And I love that quote because I know it to be true in my own life when I've been the only person in a room that's willing to be my own friend, but at least I have the self-respect of myself. It's a very powerful thing. You have no idea how good it feels to know that you can rely on yourself to have respect for you.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that quote, Lauren. That is so awesome. Well, we hope that you liked this episode on boundaries.
You can hit the like and subscribe button and ring the bell for any new videos that we send or shorts.
Yeah, and leave us any comments down below of other topics you want us to talk about. And until next time, have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.